Greetings, gentle gamers. Welcome to Casters and Castles Luncheon Lore. I'm Tormented by Gnomes. Joining me is NinjaManMat, the co-creator of the world of Anacra. Matt, how's, aside from your co-host not being able to pronounce words, how's your morning going?
Well, that's pretty normal, Joseph, but my
Fair.
morning's going pretty darn great. I am having a good time. I went out for a walk, I explored my property, and I am ready to talk about some crazy stuff.
Excellent. So, today on the show, we are discussing the undead in the world of Anacra. We have already said on previous episodes that one of the binding precepts of Anacra is if it exists in D&D, it exists in Anacra, so DMs can run whatever sort of campaign they want. But we're going to talk a little bit about how the undead fit into the cosmology, the overall lore, the ecosystem, where they come from, what the people of Anacra think about them, that sort of stuff. So, for starters, what is an undead? Do you have a definition in mind? Like, have we settled on what an undead is in our world? Let's consult the book while I put you on the spot.
Brains. Um, yeah, no, not that. I feel like when you are a creature that was alive, and like how we talked about when it comes to a creature's energy sources. You have the soul and you have spirit. And we've kind of
Mhm.
touched on this before, where the soul is more so kind of the identity or your sense of self. That is really what gets scrubbed and washed away when you go into the breakdown foundry of the underworld that prepares your soul to be used as the vital energy, which is what we kind of described as the spirit for
Mhm.
another being down the line. I feel like when you have an undead, it is either a creature that is clinging to life and it has just maybe a shred. If it's like you're talking like a ghost or something, it has maybe just a shred of its actual soul remaining. And it's mostly just that vital energy that has just refused to leave and discorporate. Whereas if you have like an animated, like an undead that was made by a spell or like a god or something that no, it's not bringing the soul of the creature to life, or it's a weird facsimile of it. It's
Mhm.
just reanimating and bringing back that vital energy through that necrotic magic source that we had discussed back in Magic a few months back.
Okay. The Monster Manual 5th edition holds undead are once living creatures. So they were alive, they are no longer alive, brought to a horrifying state of undeath, which the Monster Manual does not elaborate on, through the practice of necromantic magic or some unholy curse. Undead include walking corpses such as vampires and zombies, as well as bodiless spirits such as ghosts and specters. So, the very core essence, aside from what Matt has already said, is that the undead, they used to be alive, they are no longer alive. So, they have undergone death in some capacity. Uh, in this state, death means you are no longer, death is the cessation of biological functioning, at which point the soul and vital energy should detach from the body and be
Exactly.
recycled, right? Like the elements that make up your physical form and the energy that makes up your spiritual form are disconnected. That is death. So all undead have undergone death in some capacity, but they continue to be animate through some aberration to the natural cycle of birth, life, death, and renewal. But the not all undead are created equal, as Matt was pointing out. The process by which you create an undead means you're going to get a lot of different things. Like the only thing they have in common is that they have undergone death, and yet they still are animate. But the mechanism by which that occurs varies widely. Unless you have another idea, I feel like we should start by talking about ye old zombies and skeletons.
I do want to start there. I did want to point out something that I want us to touch on. We don't have to do it now. I kind of prefer if we don't do it now, but I want it on our brains before the end of today. I believe that blood, as we've talked about, is very important in Anakra. It draws things from outer planes to the world itself. A lot of power. We know there's blood magic and things of the such that we have godly entities that have this ichor and blood that can fuel all sorts of powerful magics. And really just blood is kind of the difference between what makes you alive and undead. I mean, if you
Mm-hmm.
have life, you're pumping, your vital energy is pumping that blood through you and having you be sustained and alive. And if you're undead, you either don't have blood or the blood no longer pump. So I think we should get into, at least in some regard, the importance of blood in living creatures and why I don't think there's any undead creature. I mean, vampires drink blood, but it's not like they drink it so it starts pumping through their body. Vampires don't have a heartbeat. They don't have a lot of rules that a lot of normal creatures follow. It's something that satiates them. It doesn't actually flow through the body. You know what I mean?
I think we have to talk about life in order to talk about undeath. So, in the world of Anacra, I'm going to posit this. Let me know how you feel about this. Blood is a physical substance that has the special property of being able to bind vital energy to physical objects. That is what is special about it. Just how blood binds oxygen and distributes it through the body, allowing homeostasis to occur and cells to do stuff. Blood in Anacra binds vital energy and circulates it through the body. Without that continuous vital energy, bodies die. They lose their ability to be the anchor for the soul. They stop undergoing homeostasis and they die. So blood is the mechanism by which vital energy circulates through the body, which means that every single undead is no longer fueled by vital energy, or at least they're no longer
Correct.
self-sustaining, right?
Yes.
That's one of the key things about the undead. Whatever they are fueled by, they cannot be self-sustaining fueled by vital energy. They are either fueled by something else, or in the case of a vampire, they are still fueled by vital energy, but it's no longer generated in their own body. So now they have to absorb it from other creatures. And a lot of undead have to absorb vital energy from other creatures, either by touch, or by eating flesh, or by drinking blood.
And I was going to say, it's not just the drinking of blood, but we have, for instance, like wights or ghouls that have to consume flesh.
Mm-hmm.
You have many creatures, not all undead creatures, but many of them have an aversion to sunlight. Not only will not having this required new vital resource to fuel you is a condition for your survival, but now staying out of the sunlight is a condition of your survival. When you get up to the top of the ladder, you have liches that have to literally consume the souls or identities of creatures in order to continue living. Things like that. So I feel like also something that I wanted to say, a little bit of a silly, but you were talking about the real world, like, binding of oxygen, all that with blood. I feel like in Anacra, you should have actual hemogoblins instead of hemoglobin that
That'll
runs
be in the
around.
Anacra monster manual. Hemogoblins.
Little tiny blood goblins that are like, oh yeah, man, I'm really sick today. Oh, it's the goblins in your blood, man. You got to go purify the goblins in your blood. But jokes aside, canon. I feel like that is also really important. Do you have a lot of prerequisites that really come in line with undeath being a curse, much like an actual blood curse, like lycanthropy, which again connecting to blood. I feel like it's that they no longer. It's not that they are surviving off of the blood or surviving off of the flesh. I feel like creatures like that necrotic energy, that curse, whatever that it is that infused them and reanimated them, that is what's actually binding them. And to me, it almost feels like how when lycanthropes are forced, when they transform to go out and attack anyone that they see, they become this feral monster. I think that with a lot of undead, it's the similar thing. I don't really think that the blood or the craving of flesh, or in certain zombies like brains and stuff like that, that isn't necessarily like oh yeah, they need that to survive. Because if you have an undead that doesn't get that thing, they usually just shrivel up and wait till something like that comes by and then they get it. I feel like it's almost a need or a desire rather than a requirement. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it's both, because a lot of those creatures actually get stronger when they absorb that energy.
Oh, absolutely.
It's this idea that normal life is bound together by the combination of vital energy and the elements in most cases. But if that circulation stops, that whole system falls apart and the creature is separated into its elements and its energy and it dies. That's death. Undead cannot die that way. But they still have needs. They still require things. It's just that even when they are deprived of those things, many of them still cannot die. So vampires, I don't remember if vampires die without it or if they just shrivel up and can be revived later.
Are you talking blood?
Yeah.
So depending on the real world mythos you're looking at, in our actual societies, for the most part, when vampires don't get enough blood, they usually go from being this very beautiful, seductive and entrancing looking old, viscount, and they turn into this shriveled old Gary Oldman, are like, I haven't had blood in a while. It's real bad. And then when they get it, they're like, I'm young and beautiful again. Again, depending on the story you're looking at. Some vampires are literal giant bat things that then can turn human. It really depends on the society or what you're looking at here. But I mean, I would think that as far as I can tell, there's no, in D&D, like we talked about, comparing it to whatever's in D&D could be in Anacra somewhere. I don't think there's a D&D requirement that vampires literally have to consume blood. I feel like it's just kind of a given.
There isn't. So I'm going to say it's a combination of a couple of things. One, They again, they are bound to this existence by a curse, by a spell, by pure unrelenting hatred, by unresolved business. So their anchor, they've got, if you talk about the undead, you can divide them into their anchor, which is permanent in most cases. Like even a lich cannot die. They can transform into a demi-lich, but they remain anchored to their existence. So that is not tied into a continuous source of whatever energy they require. But their existence is usually unpleasant and painful, and they yearn for life in some capacity. And it's like you've created a false life, right? Because life requires the ingestion of nutrients, etc., in order to maintain homeostasis. Undead still have that process. It's just that where mortal life dies if it runs out of what it needs, undead is just reduced to its base state, its weak state. The demi-lich for a lich, which isn't weak, but it is like their identity is reduced. Ghouls, like if they eat enough meat, they can maybe attain sentience, but if they go hungry, they go back to being feral.
Yes.
Every undead, based on its nature and on its curse, has a different base state, but they don't require that sustenance to exist. They require that sustenance to be strong and to maintain any sort of life. There's precedent for this in one of the myths that I bring into our story all the time, Tiresias the Blind Sage. Whenever Greek heroes go into the underworld, they usually, if they want to talk to a shade of the dead to get some key information, they have to give that shade blood, because that shade doesn't otherwise remember. They don't really have their identity. But then you give them life, and they were going to keep existing as a shade no matter what in that base state. But giving them that touch of life, that memory, that blood, restores their mind, so that now they can talk to you and tell you the big secret that you have to know to continue your quest. So I think that's one of our core ideas, is that most sentient undead, they have this sliding scale of well-fed to feral, or just whatever their base state is. A vampire,
Madness, whatever it is.
yeah, like maybe a vampire might just turn into a total feral beast instead of being Count Swagula. Or maybe they dry up and are basically mummified, and then they get a little blood and they are restored, right? There's a couple different, it's going to vary a lot case by case, but there's this general idea. They're bound to this life by an anchor of some kind, whether that be a curse, unresolved business, a spell, etc. In most cases, they no longer circulate their own vital energy. They crave it, like they want it. It's an unrelenting hunger that they experience. And also, the joys of life are deadened to them. They no longer experience things the way that they did as mortals. So even if they surround themselves in decadence and luxury, those emotions and sensations are all dampened. But they can still obtain some shadow of them by consuming vital energy via whatever means that they consume. So they go from either feral and really strong, but mindless, up to suave and sophisticated, or they actually grow stronger by consuming that vital energy. So it's
Absolutely.
like they're a living creature that just cannot die, and it's a mockery of life.
Well, and it even says, I believe in the monster manual, it talks about how when undead are reanimated, whether they're like a lowly skeleton or a lich, like you said, they're a mockery of life and they hate all living things.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you have, undead, such as like vampires and things that are willing to work with people for, the betterment of their own selfishness or personal gains, they absolutely despise
Mm-hmm.
living creatures and seek to, especially in the case of zombies and skeletons, unless they're given a command specifically to do a particular task, their default is just kill living things.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of that hatred is out of resentment or jealousy, because again, the living can experience emotions. It's like the curse. It's like pirate Captain Barbossa, right? It's like he can't taste anything. He can't really feel anything. It's all, yeah, you're immortal, but life is joyless. There's no joy to life. There's just hunger. Which
Absolutely.
is why a lot of undead revert to this feral state and lose their mind, lose their sentience, because they just lean into that hunger overall. Do you want to go into skeletons and zombies now and work our way up, or is there some...
I think that's
All
a good idea. No, totally.
All right, cool. So let's ye old necromancy 101. Get a skeleton, get a corpse, throw some necrotic energy into it, and make it dance. It's essentially stolen vital energy. So you're using a spell as your anchor, and you're just artificially pinning some vital energy, necrotic energy into it to make it move. It has no sentience. It has no soul. There's no identity in that creature. Like if you animate grandma as a zombie, that's not really grandma. It's just a corpse that has been it's like making a frog corpse twitch by zapping it with electricity on a much more sophisticated scale.
Yeah. Or at
It,
least more rawly powerful scale, because you're
mhm.
using probably less vital life energy, and you're more so just kind of facilitating or giving a facsimile of that life energy by just filling it with dark necrotic power.
Right. Well, because we've established that vital energy and necrotic energy are the same energy, just it's like different polarities, right? Because it goes through
Yeah.
this cycle. So it's like negative flow of the same stuff. And
Yeah.
because it's the same stuff, it can do the same stuff vital energy can. It's just not supposed to.
Yeah, which is why it's like a mockery of life instead of like reanimation.
Mm-hmm.
If you're using literal, raised dead and things like that, you're using like more like positive vital energy. Whereas if you
Mm-hmm.
are animating the dead, that's going to be negative vital energy.
Right. Which we just are going to say vital and necrotic, but understand it's the same crap. So
Yeah.
you use some magic, you plug in some metaphorical necrotic jumper cables to the corpse, and it doesn't have a mind, but because minds usually reside in bodies, and because this body once had a soul, that's why you can give it this rudimentary intelligence. Not because you're giving it a soul, but because that piece of meat was designed to hold a mind. So instead of a mind, you're just putting in, basic programming.
I was going to say it's probably less. Well, for instance, in regards to especially to zombies and skeletons, you're not
Mhm.
bringing back any personality or
Right.
soul, or if you are, it's just the barest shred of it, just to make sure that it can function on that base
Hmm.
level of receiving commands, like we discussed. I think you're more so bringing back either a piece or an echo of the spirit that once fueled it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Now, in regards to very similar things, excuse me, if you are going to be using the spell like Speak with Dead, where you're literally asking a creature that's been dead for no more than 10 days and has a head, face, mouth, whatever, I would say that that does actually, as again, using that requirement that it hasn't been any longer than 10 days, there is still a shred of that creature's soul churning in the underworld where you're able to temporarily bring that piece of their soul back, that identity that they had, and you're
Hmm.
able to ask it questions it knew in life. Now, you can't give it new information. It doesn't care about anything that happened since it died, but it can answer to the best of its knowledge, and they don't have to be truthful. So, for instance, if you killed this guy and then reanimated them, you could say, "Hey, like what's your social security number?" And it's like, "Screw you, man! You killed me." It doesn't have to answer you, truthfully or otherwise. It could even straight up lie to you.
Hey,
So, I mean,
man,
in
what's
that
your
regard,
social
you are.
security number?
How do you spell that? But yeah, so in that regard, you are using that, and I would say again, I'm not sure if that one is going to be it's going to specify to the kind of magic. Sure, I'm sure we have to take a look and see what kind of force you'd be using to pull that soul
Well,
back temporarily.
there are some questions to this. First off, even before the advent of the Kingdom of Shadows, and after the Kingdom of Shadows rolls along, excuse me, I just got a new order
Oh,
of
I was
coffee.
going to say, did you mute?
No, I was just holding back a gigantic, ugly yawn. After
Oh yeah,
Ramius takes over the underworld, the soul refining recycling process is extended by a lot because those souls still serve as the framework, even if they're turned into empty vessels. Those are still required to serve in Ramius's army. So, like your service might be 100 years, so your soul might not go to the great mulcher in the sky for a long time. And even then, I don't think that there's a hard limit on how long it takes an individual soul to break down and be gone and be reconstituted into the multiverse. It's going to vary soul by soul,
yeah.
right?
Oh,
It's super
absolutely.
variable. Now,
I was just using that as an option since in
right.
D&D Fifth Edition, the spell requires it be dead for no longer than 10 days.
So here's my thought. I don't know if Speak with Dead yoinks the soul out of the underworld and stuffs it back into the body, or just turns the corpse into like a tin can on a string that goes down to the underworld, because
Oh, that's a good point.
pieces of the soul reside in the body still. The majority of the soul is now in the underworld. If you cast this, and I know the body speaks, but is it the body speaking because the soul has been dragged back up, or is the body speaking because, like, again, ring ring ring, hello, call for dead guy, like down in the underworld, the soul is contacted and it speaks, and the body moves like a puppet. Let's see if we can Go
My
ahead.
thought would be, considering you have to have a head, mouth, and all that stuff in order for them
Mhm.
to be able to speak with you, I I would I like your idea of the ring ring, dead service. How can we help you? But then at that point, why do you need to have an actual face and head and all that? You could literally just grab someone's foot and say, "Hey, foot, like I'm using you as a channel. Talk to me." Unless there's like just
Because
a
the foot is not a channel. The foot is a channel to that creature's speed, but the foot does not contain the capacity for speech. Remember how I was saying that skeletons and zombies can be programmed because bodies were designed to hold souls and to hold identities? It's the same thing going on here. That body, it's like having a piece of someone's hair or having a symbol of someone or having their true name, right? It's by having the head, you're creating a channel for that soul to connect to, like a doll that would allow you to connect and influence things because of the law of, as above so below, the law of correspondences. You're using that vessel, the head, to allow them to speak through it, but it's only a level 3 spell. It's not powerful enough to be like, behold, appear before me. You still need a physical vessel, and you need those links.
I see what you're saying. And we're
Mhm.
getting into weird territory where the more that you think of things in an archaic sense, I completely agree with you. In a more
Mhm.
modern sense, you could literally have, again, just putting it into a D&D sense, a player say, okay, fine, it's missing a head. I'm going to take a bunch of pieces from its actual body and I'm going to fabricate a head. I'm going to fuse
Mhm.
bones together. I'm going to cast healing spells. I'm going to mend this thing in such a way where it now has a cranium, a palate. I'm going to make sure that, if you blew the top of their head off, but they still had the bottom of their head, the spell wouldn't require the brain matter. So I'm literally just going to make a facsimile of this creature's head, face, skin, and whatever. And boom, there is now a head it could speak out of. But are we saying that even though functionally that thing acts exactly like what the spell would be had they done it from a creature that just had the top of its head blown off? Or are we saying, well, no, but that's part of its cheek and foot and ass crack and bone cuticles, and even though you have
Mhm.
functioned and made a face and brain and head, that doesn't really count, does it? I mean,
Well, the scrying spell, if you don't have a piece of that person, right? Because a piece of that person works the best, but if you have a portrait of that person, it also helps. The image of the thing is connected to the thing. So what?
wait. So are you saying if someone had their head blasted off, but I took a picture of, like, let's say Hugh Jackman out of a magazine and placed it over the head of where this thing's gore is, and just go, okay, I'm focusing on the face of this creature, and I'm going to use it as a focus to hopefully speak to them in the afterlife.
uh
Would we let that fly?
no, because that person was not Hugh Jackman. Now, if it was Hugh Jackman, I probably still wouldn't let that fly. But here's the thing: if the players were creative and they invested resources and they came up with this idea to recreate a mouth for this creature out of parts of the creature, I'd consider that really cool, and I would let it work. I would probably turn it into a skill challenge. I might make them spend additional magic on it, right? Because it's a level 3 spell that they're sacrificing in order to get these benefits. Uh,
Yeah.
if they're going to sacrifice additional resources and it's within reason, I would 100% let that fly.
I think what I'm getting at, mate, is that
Mhm.
if you look at it from like a let's say a flavor standpoint in the game of D&D, it's saying, hey, flavor wise, quit destroying the heads of enemies you want to talk to. They
Mhm.
have to have a head when you talk to them. And I would think it's because you've got 10 days before the soul passes on. Again,
Mhm.
and it works differently in Anacra. I'm just saying that by the time in Anacra, the 10 days has passed, enough of that soul has gone through boot camp or been recycled that it's not salvageable to ask, so you would ask questions for. Because in my brain of brains, you're bringing it back and temporarily implanting it in that body. If you're just using the body as a conduit and, doing ring ring, I get what you're saying, having like body parts act as like a conduit to being able to
Mhm.
react to a certain part of that creature. But like we said, if that's the case, you could go through and make this a skill challenge and use a facsimile of it, and you could just call out that creature using just about anything. If you're kind of using the
Well,
spirit of it,
here's the
yeah.
thing. The text of the spell says you grant the semblance of life and intelligence to a corpse of your choice within range. So the spell does not say you're plucking the soul from the underworld. The spell just says
That's true.
it actually says this spell doesn't return the creature's soul to its body, only its animating spirit. So it literally says that. I would argue that the presence of spiritual energy in the body is like the presence of body heat, right? It's like when someone dies, you can
That's a good
take
point.
liver temperature to tell how long it's been since they died. The spiritual vital energy and the echo of that person's soul fades after 10 days. And it's not like you can just stick it in an oven and heat it back up, right? It's like that tether, the usefulness of this corpse as a tether to that original echo fades after 10 days. It dissipates and it's gone. So if you're within the 10 days and you want to jump through all those hoops and you have enough pieces and the players come up with a really creative idea, then I say yes. Chat asked about animating a clay statue as a conduit for speaking. I would say no, because that clay statue does not have the echoes of that creature's spirit in it. That's why painting a picture of, stapling a picture of their face to it wouldn't work, because the body has to contain the echoes, and it's literally using the body as a puppet. Where were we?
Okay.
Skeletons and zombies and aliens and monsters.
Oh, we were doing skeletons and zombies, and I took us on a slight detour talking about the Speak with Dead spell, because I like the idea of being able to make sure that we were focusing on spirit versus soul, and we were kind of touching on that a bit. So we've established no soul but spirit, yes, for, like you said. And I like the idea that the soul is gone, and unless you find a way to bring it back either with magic or other means, the soul itself is gone when the body dies, but the spirit lingers for, like we said, about, again, depending on the requirement. I would say different spells and different things. Specifically, this third level Speak with Dead spell requires enough energy from 10 days or less for it to be able to work. There may be other things that have, again, like you were saying, you might have a body that within the first day has a whole bunch of spiritual energy. Within 10 days, it's got a modicum of what it had. And maybe even a year from now, it has just a scrap of it. We're like, yeah, this thing was once alive. So it really just kind of depends on what that lingering effect is.
If we switch from thinking about it like body heat to thinking about it like DNA evidence can, like, the longer DNA has, there's certain types of biological information that is lost as it degrades, right? As it is broken down over time, as it decomposes. And this spell is essentially constituting spiritual information that the creature would have had. So that information becomes degraded to the point of uselessness after 10 days. But, like, there's, again, some more powerful spell that isn't reviving the soul, like a raised dead, etc., probably would still work, because it's like having better equipment in your CSI lab. Old equipment could only work after a certain amount of time. Newer equipment, we're pulling DNA off of buried mummies and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
So in regards to skeletons and zombies, we already established that those things are just a facsimile of life. There really is no thoughts. The only kind of emotions. I mean, I feel like most of what they have is just they're running off of emotions. Like we said, base instincts, hunger, anger, or even jealousy in a way, things like that.
But jealousy and stuff as understood by, like, a cockroach, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Then we move up. I usually think of the next class of undead as your ghoul, like as ghouls and wights. A lot of the corporeal undead. They have various degrees of intelligence.
The flesh eaters.
The flesh eaters, the life drainers that are not incorporeal. Now, I've seen, in Order of the Stick, for example, when a character gets turned into a vampire, the vampire is not the character. The character's mind is trapped inside the vampire. It's this other evil spirit from elsewhere that occupies them.
Which kind of brings it in line, like we talked about, with the whole curse aspect of it.
The question for us is, with most sentient undead, and this doesn't have to be unilateral, right? It could be for some, but not for others. Is it possible for the soul to have already moved on and there's something else still there? Like, it has all that person's memories, but it's not actually them. It's like their body kept going with this new identity that was copied from the old identity, but the soul continued to move on? Or does the soul reside in the creature?
I think that goes in line with our previous topic about spirit and souls. And when we discussed about souls being trapped, we weren't married, and we didn't love the idea of someone who did a life of pure and good and wonderfulness could end up either making one bad choice, have one bad day, or get stuck with something that they didn't intend, and now their soul is doomed for all eternity by no fault of their own. I feel like that's what we're describing with this vampire scenario. If there was a person that, whether by their own choice or were forcibly made into a vampire, they're shunted away into, like, what is effectively a pocket dimension in their own mind, and they are forced to either watch or just sit in limbo as this facsimile, this dark copy of themselves runs around in what used to be their flesh suit, doing all kinds of evil undead things. So I think it just kind of boils down is, do we want a world in which that is a thing that happens? Or once this creature died, yes, the curse, the magic, whatever reanimated them and brought them to life, it could be somewhat of a kind of like, when you cast, like, I forget what the actual spell is called, but there's a spell that just flips your alignment,
Hmm.
and you're the exact same character. It's just that all your stuff, everything that you believe, is the polar opposite of it. It could be something like that, where like a copy of your soul is created, or at least it merges in a way. I feel like, here's the thing: if we go with the former, where you're trapped, that's awful, but it kind of makes sense because you're
Hmm.
basically making a copy of, like, you're almost cutting their soul in half and giving yourself like the dark version and then shunting away what's left of them.
Hmm.
Or if they are moving on, same thing, like you're taking a piece of them. I think that's what we're kind of looking at here, is that you have it to where no matter what the scenario is, what we decide on, you're kind of taking the soul and tearing it apart, and either the other half that was what it was goes down to be processed, and then the rest of it is made into this dark facsimile of itself, or just instead of being shunted away down into the underworld, it's shunted away back in their own mind. Where do you
Here's
feel about that?
here's my thought. Uh, a lot of my ideas about this come from a particularly horrible monster from a third edition supplement, Legions of Hell, that was full of new demons. Some of which new devils, some of which I've converted and may eventually appear in our fifth edition Descent into Avernus campaign. But there was a monster called an oubliette, and I hate this monster, and I don't want this monster to exist. Like, I'm never going to use this monster because I think it's awful. The idea is, if there's a champion of good, and you don't want their soul to move on because that'll reinforce the forces of light, you chop off their head and stick the head in this monster, the oubliette, and that keeps it alive. And then the oubliette just walks around with this head through hell forever until the soul in the head starts to like enjoy all the, because it's so traumatized, starts to enjoy all the evil it's seeing and enjoy the punishments. Now the soul is evil, you crush the head, and congratulations, you've damned this creature. Like, you've taken this good creature, tortured it until it was evil. Like, I hate that. I hate the denial of agency that involves. I don't want that in my worlds. So my thought is, and let me know how you feel about this, if you are transformed into an undead creature involuntarily, then your soul is effectively trapped. And you are not morally culpable for the evil you do in your transformed state. You know what I mean? Because that's not you. You are a prisoner. In a lot of, now, maybe not all cases, but in a lot of cases with most undead. Like, maybe if you're turned into a ghoul, ghouls don't imprison your soul if you are involuntarily turned into a ghoul. Like, it's sort of a low-ranking monster. We can tweak this as it is. The idea is, if you are involuntarily transformed into a monster, into a undead, then that is not you doing those things. That is the undead doing those things. And either your soul moves on to the afterlife or your soul is trapped. However, there are a lot of exceptions. First exception: ghouls can arise spontaneously when people commit acts of cannibalism, right? Like, if you commit cannibalism to survive, that may transform you into a ghoul. In those cases, in some of those cases, you are the ghoul, because that is the direct result of your choices and the things you did, right? It's not like I chose to fight that vampire because I had to defend myself or it was the right thing to do and I got turned into a vampire spawn. Yeah, that arose from your choices and you're cursed, but like, you did not choose to murder that person. There's a moral sort of element here. And it's going to be a fuzzy line because morality is always a fuzzy line. But my thought, like I said, is that if you're turned into a spawn involuntarily, that's not you. You're either on board as a prisoner or you just move along and this thing is wearing you as a hat. But if you do something awful or it is the result of a curse, that might be you. How does that sound?
So here's the thing. Morally, like you were saying, Matt agrees with you. I think that
Mm-hmm.
I think that it sucks. And we had a conversation about this earlier about how, whether it's in a game or in real life, we get attached to our characters, i.e., ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and we want them to have good lives. We want to make sure that we make the best choices possible, at least with what is presented to us, and have a very fulfilling story that by the end of our existence, or the existence of our character, we feel like, hey, they had a good run of it. But there are things that can happen, whether you are forced to sell your soul to a lich in order to save your family, or if you fall into a wood chipper, that
Mhm.
might be a very, very bad period to the end of your life.
Mhm.
And whereas here in reality, there are multiple different ideas about what happens after you die, and it's very difficult to put a pin on what exactly is that it happens. It's a great mystery. Whereas in Anacra, we have a very, again, the common folk or people who are not as studious in regards to what happens into the greater aspects of the finality of what can be happening in the other realms in Anacra. They
Mhm.
may not know, but there are people who do know of these things. But I feel like in a way, you're by by doing it the way that you presented, which
Mhm.
again, Matt likes, I feel like you're getting rid of or robbing undead creatures of this inherent danger or threat that they possess. It's not just much like a bear. A bear will kill you and it will be awful the whole way through.
Mhm.
A wraith can kill you and it will be awful the whole way through. The issue is when you're dead, a bear kills you and you're dead, you turn into fertilizer and you help, raise up the forest and like, hey, that sucked. If a white or a undead kills you, there's a possibility that you could rise as a shade or a wraith
Mhm.
yourself, and whether it's just your body, like that sucks, it happened to you, but also there's certain possibilities where your soul could be eternally damned. Or like you said,
Mhm.
you could be doing the nice thing by going out and fighting a vampire. And the worst thing that happens to you with what you've described is that, hey, I'm giving my life on the line to possibly stop this dark thing, and it may raise my body as an
Become
agent
the
of its
very
affairs,
thing that I hate. So
but at
you're
least my
concerned
soul
about
is saved.
you're concerned about losing the horror of it all.
Because that's what makes undead creatures. Again, and
Mhm.
we've talked about how both with celestials and fiends, there's a chance for either redemption or falling on both sides of it. Because
Mhm.
again, none of these creatures are wholly. We talked about how even the deities of our world are just extremely powerful beings that have this sense of grandeur to them. But even the sovereigns themselves are not like true gods. They can be, we've had them, they can die, they can be discorporated. Their energy
Mhm.
still remains. But things in this world have bodies and minds that are both
Mhm.
corruptible and enlightened. But I feel like I feel like you're hamstringing and getting rid of an inherent dread that comes with dealing with many of undead creatures if
So
you don't carry that risk along with it.
let me
You know what I
reapproach.
mean?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Let me reapproach this. So there's a common thing in fiction where a character undergoes a redemption arc, and we, the audience, are meant to believe, oh, that character is now redeemed. That character is now a good guy. When in fact, said character has done some war crimes, right? Like Darth Vader sacrifices himself to defeat his master to save his son at the very end. That was a good thing that Darth Vader did. That does not change the fact that Darth Vader has murdered a ton of innocent people and tortured people and blown up planets. Like Darth Vader does not suddenly just, oh well, he did a very important good thing that took a lot of personal effort from him. Let's not downplay that. But like that ain't a redemption arc. That's yeah, you sacrificed your life, but the damage is done. And the existence of being a force ghost afterwards, like I think Darth Vader needs to go through force purgatory. Darth Vader needs to continue to atone for his sins in the afterlife by doing acts of good and trying to repair the damage that he's done. It's not like a just instant, oh, now you're a knight in shining armor good guy. So I want to avoid that. However, because I hold pretty firmly to that idea that you can't just flip a switch and be like, oh, now you're a good guy and we're going to forget all the atrocities you've done so far. My thought is that from a moral perspective, if you are transformed into a monster, into an undead, that's you, but you are way more eligible to be more redeemed in the eyes of the people than if you were still in control of yourself, because you are literally a monster now. You know, you might have the noble ghoul who fights the urges, you might have the noble vampire who fights the urges, but if that is you, I think this is more of a we can leave that in because I think I agree with you. Without the horror of the undead, they lose a lot of their power.
I do like what you're getting at though. That was going to be my next suggestion, which I'm so glad that we're of similar mind and you jumped right into. I feel like in reality, if you think about it, you could say that there are truly good people and there's references you can make, and you could say there's truly evil people and there's very obvious references you can make. I feel like just it's not as clear cut as that. There are
Hmm.
absolutely good acts and evil acts, but just by doing a good act doesn't make you a good person. Like you said, Darth Vader
Hmm.
did a good act at the end of the sixth movie, and even though in his early life and leading up even into his, you know, he made good choices up until a certain point, and then he made a string of bad choices. And then going on to the extended material, there is a lot of books, comics, and things, whether it's legacy or canon, that have gone on to show that he was a very tortured and conflicted character throughout even
Hmm.
his reign as Darth Vader. He wasn't fully on board with what he was doing. That being said, he still committed atrocities. That being said, though, he's still a mortal creature. And I feel like when it comes to mortal creatures, D&D uses an alignment system that a lot of people either love or hate.
Hmm.
Uh, but I feel like when it comes to undead or even other such creatures like fiends and angels and such, celestials, you have not just the creature can do good and bad things. A creature is inherently good, evil, or otherwise. Otherwise, with they, things like that.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like, much like with a lot of things in Anacra, creatures that even are inherently being an undead is an evil thing. But I feel like, especially if you are an undead with a mind of some kind and there's enough of your soul left, and you, like you said, I think what we're looking at here is give them agency in a certain respect. If you were a
Hmm.
character that was inherently and amazingly good in life, if you are turned into a vampire spawn or a wraith or a wight or something, it's not that your soul isn't damned and that you spent a
Hmm.
whole life of good and now you're evil and that sucks. I feel like you should have a greater sense of self, and you had so much willpower in life to do what was right, that even in now undeath, that you are a creature of inherent evil. You fight against it, you push against it, and even if you don't go around being the vampire Lestat and you're like, oh, I eat rats and I don't touch
Hmm.
people and I'm a paragon of good and I drive a Mercedes and I'm wonderful and I look beautiful and whatever. You don't have to be that, but you could be this very, like in books where you have that creature that doesn't want to do what it's being forced to do, and
Hmm.
it's constantly fighting against it. And by the end of it, you find out, oh yeah, this character was a really good person. They say no to like this final command and they fight the bad guy, pull a very Vader
Hmm.
thing, and they have like, oh cool, they were destroyed, but because they didn't fully go into their thing, their soul is saved. That whole
Hmm.
thing, we can kind of have a bit, I think, of that in there. And I think there could be, much like with Renegade Illithids, you can have a anti-hero good guy wraith that only eats the flesh of criminals and things
Hmm.
like that. I totally think that itself is more in line with what we're doing with Anacra. And I don't think we need to get into specifically the whole, are people's souls damned or are they
Hmm.
let off the hook for living a good life prior? Because there again, if that's the case, we would need to come up with a titan or some other such power that then judges in the moment of death,
Hmm.
okay, did you leave a good life or a good enough life? And what
Right. Well,
this creature could be tainted, and it leads the whole thing open about who is right and who is wrong and all this stuff, you know?
right. Anacra doesn't have a lot of objective morality. In fact, Anacra, the afterlife is essentially non-specific reincarnation, where you become one with the universe and more souls arrive. And we've talked about this before, where it's not like, oh, I die, now I will be reincarnated. It's like, I die and now parts of me will go on to live in other souls elsewhere. So there is no good afterlife, bad afterlife. The only ones are temporary. And the way that I always phrase this is that it's not like there's a judge. There is a judge. It's Ramius, but
There is a judge.
his only sentence is either annihilation or serve in my army. Like, that's all. Ramius is not here to espouse morality. Ramius is here to kick ass and chew bubblegum because he's keeping the Infernals, under his heel, essentially. So the good afterlife, bad afterlife is all about whether first off you get an offer, and most of the good afterlives are things
The
like,
petitions, yes.
yeah, it's like, hey, this deity is gonna extend a hand to you, right? But that we are not coming out to say, okay, I'll come out to say the Infernals are evil and they're assholes, but like, it's not like there's one omnipotent deity that says good, bad, naughty, and nice. It's just, which are there any deities that are going to lend you a hand, or did you make yourself vulnerable to a specific evil by feeding that evil in life? That's usually
Or
how
make a
people,
pact or bargain that even in
right?
death cannot be broken.
Like, a pact or bargain is just the most surefire way to end up in Uzul's domain, or
At the time of death or whatever, yeah.
exactly. But a lot of these, it's when you cross over, the way that you lived your life makes you more susceptible to specific infernals or other powers. Like, if you were a conquering, brutal tyrant, okay, Uzul's more likely to say, hey, you don't want to go be a join me and we shall rule the galaxy forever when you die. Like directly say, yo, come on over. You don't have to go through the rivers and lose your identity. You can instead join me and be a imperialist colonizing asshole for the rest of eternity. But a lot of other infernals, it's like when you cross over, they snatch you because you fed them. You made those specific infernals stronger. So ultimately, everybody gets the same end state of the cycle is eternal, but the trip that you take to get there is what's really going to vary. So when I talk about the good versus evil of, our undead redeemed, right? And when I talk about redemption, and we talk about you were a holy knight and you sacrificed your life and you were turned into a vampire and then you did evil acts. I think it's less about objective reality and it's more about our perceptions, because if you don't believe in a larger overarching afterlife, then everyone gets the same thing when they die, regardless of what they did in life. And our perceptions of, were you redeemed? Did you live a good life? Or like, not even were you a good person, but did your life do more help than harm, is up for us to decide. So I think that I just need to, we keep the horror of the undead in there, becoming the monster. That's like the core horror of the undead. You're dead right with that. I think it's just that in my own head and amongst certain characters in Anacra, because not everyone's going to see this the same way, you see a warlord and a tyrant, and somebody who's greedy, who destroys the lives of others. You view them as they are causing harm. Their choices and their selfishness are causing harm, and I repudiate that. But you see the undead with pity and horror, because
yes,
if an undead gives in to the evil that consumes them, like, they're fighting a battle none of us can understand. And yeah, the right thing to do is to fight that hunger. But when they eventually give in to the hunger, you're not like, now you are a thing of evil and you have made an evil decision and you will be punished for your crimes. Okay, some people will still say that.
yeah.
But like, the approach is more, you fought
I
hard,
think,
but it was an impossible
yeah,
task.
it's more in line with undead, you poor soul, and
Mm-hmm.
someone who is literally falling to darkness is you fiend. There's a reason why we say things like you
Mm-hmm.
fiend. You are a person that is becoming fiendish, and you don't go around saying you dead guy. Like, that's not really an exclamation people say when you're doing
Mm-hmm.
bad shit.
Right. It's like
Um,
you smite the crap out of them, but you sort of get like, look, it's not your fault that you're devouring the flesh of the living, but I'm still going to smite the shit out of you.
Oh yeah, I mean, like heck, if you have again, you don't fault a bear, for eating you, if you go out in the woods, you shouldn't have
Mm-hmm.
been there. A bear does what a bear does. A ghoul
Mm-hmm.
does what a ghoul does.
Yeah.
The only difference is that a bear, if it's hungry enough, it's not going to stop its hunger and it's going to eat you. A ghoul, mayhaps if it was good enough in life, it may stay its claw or tooth and
Mm-hmm.
give you enough time to get away,
We
or not, it'll just devour you.
we've spent a ton of time. There's something else that I want to talk about.
Yes,
We've
I
really
was
been talking
about
about
to
the
try and
philosophy of the undead.
yeah.
There's something I want to talk about, but I monopolized the conversation. You go first.
I was going to say, before we ended today, I wanted to get to liches because that's important.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I wanted to touch on incorporeal undead. We've talked a lot about the
Yes.
corporeal undead. And what I wanted to do, and just take a quick bit of moment, if I could just monopolize for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
We had talked about how the servants of Ramius cannot come to the mortal world. Specifically, they cannot leave the underworld. And that makes sense. However, an amendum that I was saving for this episode that I wanted to approach you with is that when we have petitioners try and make sure they can speak for the souls of the dead and take them from Ramius's realm, I feel like,
Mm-hmm.
especially like we've talked about, there is a giant throne room inside of a mausoleum down in hell, or not hell, the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Ramius, the shadow of death, presiding over the souls in this grand dark throne. And I feel like when these souls pass through what they need to do and they get past the adamant gates and they get there and they're laid bare before Ramius, I feel like there's this moment where either they're inducted into the army, or you can have, I guess you could say, the neutral or goodly, maybe even evil gods, just not the infernals, I would say, that
Mm-hmm.
basically come to his court and they petition and they make their case and either take him or they don't. And I feel like we have this thing where either in the underworld, but before they get to the adamant gates, or even I'm thinking in like the ethereal, where you have creatures such as fiendish creatures or evil creatures that will attempt to, while the soul is drawn to the underworld and is moving its way. Here's my pitch. Creatures die. They don't just immediately just teleport into the underworld. They appear right where they died, much like when you have that scene where people die, they look down at themselves and go, oh God, there's my body. Oh my goodness,
Hmm.
they're in the ethereal, because we know that incorporeal ghosts spend their time in the ethereal. That's where they live.
Hmm.
So my thought is that either Ramius or something connected to him has almost these, they'd be considered reapers, but they're these guardians of undeath that patrol the wastes or the foggy terrain that is the ethereal, and they guide souls down into hell, and then until they can get to the soldiers of Ramius, that once they pass from the threshold of the ethereal until into the underworlds, now
Hmm.
they have guards that can keep the fiends and the undead and the weird things that would try and claim or lure these recently dead souls, bring them to their realm. These guardians or these shepherds try and guide them through the ethereal to get to the underworld in order to get to these
Hmm.
soldier protector guides that will then bring them to Ramius's court. That's what I'm trying to pitch and what I'm kind of thinking about there.
Okay, I like it. We're not going to call them reapers, and we're not going to call them shepherds, because
I
these
was
are
just making a
no,
comparison.
for
Yeah.
sure. I'm not trash talking you. I'm saying these are wardens,
Yes.
because Ramius's themes are prison and military, right? So he's the stern lord. So he sends his wardens to escort you, or like his marshals to escort you down into the underworld. A couple of addendums to that. One, dead souls are naturally drawn into the underworld, but
Absolutely.
it's not an immediate process, right? If someone dies and they don't try to bail, they don't have some sort of trauma that allows them to remain as a ghost, no magic interferes, nobody snatches up their soul, they're just going to end up in the underworld.
Absolutely.
And they're going to end up on the far side of the Five Rivers. There's sort of an antechamber of the underworld where most souls it's like the lobby. It's where most souls arrive. And it is heavily patrolled because that is the primary point for abduction. I'm going to go one step further with what you said and say that when a soul crosses all five rivers, it has been scrubbed. And so not like at that point, it can be restored to a certain degree. But as thematically appropriate as the Court of Ramius is for people to petition for these various souls, I feel like the process has to happen before they pass
As
through
I
the
was
five
saying
rivers.
I thought the same thing. I was like,
Mhm.
even though I like the idea of Ramius holding court there, I feel like when you're petitioning for the soul, you almost do it with like almost like there's a sub warden that's below
Mhm.
Ramius but above the regular wardens, like some kind of like lieutenant or whatever. That
Like a
before they enter
Minos,
the
like a Minos figure.
yeah, like someone that
Mhm.
kind of almost like the what was it, the voice of Sauron that stands at the Black Gate that speaks for the
Oh.
Dark Lord, kind of something like that. But instead of
Mhm.
being this very hello there, Aragorn, like you have a entity that can basically speak or acts even as a channel for Ramius before they
Mhm.
pass through the rivers and are cleansed. That's where the petitioning happens. Now, I'm assuming that there could be, even after you go through some last minute petition where
Mhm.
a god rolls up into the chamber of Ramius and restores this creature to their former self and brings them. So I'm sure that happens, just not often.
Yes, it's not the standard process. I almost, for some reason, envision this like when you get to the airport, there's curbside check-in, but then you have to go through security.
Yes, you can't. Security is the pool, is the river. It's like once
Yeah.
like you can't pass beyond this point. Now you have to say
Mhm.
goodbye to your loved ones and wave you there.
Exactly. So
But then there's the scene where you have the person running up to the plane and just like, hey, get out of there. Come on, come back home. And
mhm.
that's you kind of last minute, like, hey, pull him out, pull him out. We can do this.
Mhm. No, I really like that. I like that a lot. We should delve into that because we were planning on doing Sovereign episodes. We should do Titan episodes. We should talk about that because I
Absolutely.
absolutely feel like there needs to be like a military camp, a mini mausoleum on the far side of the rivers.
Yes.
That's the checkpoint. The Ellis
Yes, that
Island
makes
of the
sense.
Damned.
with a giant like throne with like, hey, let's cast a light over here, so it puts a shadow right here. Yeah, that'll symbolize Ramius. Okay, cool.
Perfect.
Yeah, we
Great.
got it.
Yeah. Just frame it. And
Good,
so
good.
I imagine that when the dead arrive, they don't automatically get deployed right to that spot because that's a fortified base on the far side of the rivers. And the rivers go long and wide. The rivers aren't, they're huge. They surround the kingdom of the dead. And so you've got, maybe there's multiple checkpoints.
And I feel
don't
like the
know.
rivers are almost metaphysical, where they don't even
Yeah.
have to be an actual thing. They just appear. They appear as a border, and no matter
Mhm.
how you try and approach the kingdom of Ramius, these rivers will just manifest and
Yeah.
create a natural moat or border.
Agreed. So the dead are either found by these roving wardens and like brought through the ethereal to the Ellis Island of the Damned, or they just end up in the underworld, and Ramius has active patrols in that area. But that's also one of the primary war zones. Again, we don't have the blood war. we have the conflict between the Infernals and the forces of Ramius. So the primary battleground is this lobby area, which Ramius is heavily invested in fortifying to make sure that all souls get escorted through the system.
And it's like you said, I feel like a lot of this, like we said, is just automated. Like it just happens. And we have these entities, whether it be the sovereigns or now Ramius, the warden of the dead, that basically come in and say, oh, hey, cool, this thing is working as appropriate, but it could be better. And there could be fail safes. And a lot of the things
Mhm.
that happen are just trying to improve or create fail safes to make sure that this thing
or
continues
their
working without
or their
problems.
countermeasures to infernal interference, right? Because the
Exactly.
system, when
Yes.
Ramius rewrote the laws of the universe, he made it so that souls all go to the underworld, and he made it so that they are drawn. They're not forced, but like they're forced to go to the underworld, and then they are drawn inherently towards his kingdom. Uh,
Yes.
but then the Infernals obviously tried to intercept people along the way, which means that you had to send out armies to patrol that area, etc., etc. Incorporeal undead. A quick run through of them, and liches. We have 5 minutes. Incorporeal undead. Many of them are created by extenuating circumstances. A villainous, vile murderer might refuse to die and become a wraith. Extreme emotion, acts of great trauma can cause the process by which the spiritual energy departs for the underworld to fail. They can serve as anchors, locking them into the mortal world. This is the most common with ghosts, who are one of the least evil types of undead. Ghosts are usually souls. Ghosts are actual souls, which is
Yes.
fairly rare. Souls enshrouded in vital and necrotic energy that are anchored by some sort of past trauma, which is why the key to solving a ghost is usually to figure out what it wants, what's keeping it here, which sucks when it's an evil ghost that is staying here in order to, stalk somebody. Then we have a problem. Wraiths are usually murderers, specters, and others might be the victims of violent deaths who are too traumatized to pass on. The other main source of incorporeal undead are escaped souls, souls that bail on the underworld, and they flee. It's rare, but if you have enough willpower or fear or whatever, you can actually like end up in the underworld, refuse to cross the rivers, escape from the armies of Ramius and from the Infernals, find a pathway back into the mortal world, like a literal crossing point into the mortal world. But now you exist as this entity you don't belong there anymore, so you have to feed in order to maintain your mind.
I feel like that is like in the realm of like shadows, where you have these
Mm-hmm.
creatures that they are undead, incorporeal creatures that, like you said, they draw and they zap the strength and life out of their victims. And for the most part, they don't have any real soul anymore. Yes, they are made of necrotic, vital life energy, but like we said, they've gone through the underworld. They've been scrubbed of who they were, and they become literally a shadow or a shade of their former self. And they have
Mm-hmm.
no more identity that makes them what they are. They just are running from this duty, and they are reaching at the semblance of life that they'll never again have.
And you're going to get variance based on the power of the
Oh,
soul and how,
absolutely.
right? So shadows are scraps, right? Shadows are just they're shadows of their former selves. Specters are a little bit more the actual person. Wraiths are like all the negative aspects of a person, and ghosts are literal souls. Like if you were a soul that just maintained your self-awareness and dipped on the underworld, you'd come back as a ghost.
Oh
But
yeah,
you'd
but
only
I
be
mean,
able to
like
do that.
if you like ran from the checkpoint, you didn't actually go through and get cleansed or anything like
Yeah,
that.
once you start going through the rivers, like every river removes aspects of you, washes them away. So at that point, all bets are off.
And then
Uh,
you've got revenants, which are an entirely new thing that are
right. And
awesome.
they're a lot like ghosts, right? Ghosts and revenants have in common a purpose that binds them to the mortal world. And
Yeah, revenants are kind of an upgraded corporeal version of a ghost. They are
Mhm,
a soul. They have thoughts, goals, actions, but their whole
mhm,
purpose is very Punisher like. They're like, hey, like how we talked about, if they have a will that's strong enough, I was wrongly killed, or this person betrayed my family. Very Count of Monte Cristo. This horrible thing happened to me, and I
mhm.
absolutely have to avenge it. I have 1 year from the day that it happened to reanimate and make it happen. And I will keep coming back no matter what you do to me until I either succeed or my time runs out. But this is
Mhm.
going to happen, or so help me, I will ruin myself to make it so.
Okay, liches in 60 seconds, Matt, go.
Liches, gosh, they are very powerful spellcasters, usually archmages or something of their ilk. They want to make sure that they can continue their work, and usually they're mortal creatures. I would say mostly humans. You could definitely have elves that do it, but it's a
Mhm,
creature that felt like they have more, and it's less about wanting to live, and it's more about wanting to gather knowledge. Liches want to gather knowledge, power. They want to usually have some kind of a goal. You have something like Asarak in normal D&D, that they are a lich that basically, almost like Vecna, created a religion around themselves. They chose to be a demi-lich because they craved that madness. They wanted to, once they got all the knowledge in the world, they created this enormous dungeon that constantly feeds in, and they take the souls of those that die in their dungeon in order to fuel themselves and their cultists and followers, and they're trying to get enlightenment through this. But for the most part, liches are making sure that they are making a pact with a dark creature. I don't think you're looking at Ramius. You're looking at an infernal or something like it,
Mm-hmm.
possibly even maybe even the one flesh in a weird way. But you're making some kind of pact for this continued life. You safeguard this pact. You do not share it with others. You burn the notes and other things that go into making it, because you are inherently a very selfish thing. You want to make sure that you can keep on going for your own means. This is not an altruistic reason why you're doing this. And then you have to feed on the souls, the literal identities of other living creatures in order to keep this facsimile of life going. You're hyper intelligent and you don't have the same. Liches are all the power of becoming an undead with almost none of the drawbacks.
Mm-hmm. When we say pact, it's not like a warlock. Liches, the pact that they make is for the secrets of the ritual, and that ritual is the basis of their anchor, right? Like the knowledge of how to create that to anchor themselves to existence, defying. It's like if you're on a slide and you nail your hand to the slide so you can't keep falling down, but you should be falling down. That's what you're doing to the cycle of life, and the ritual allows you to do that. It's incredibly powerful magic. But because of the way that the ritual works that pins you to reality, your identity continually erodes because you no longer have a self-sustaining identity, which is why you have to eat souls. Yet you need the vital energy of spiritual energy to keep doing, but you have to literally break down other people's identities in order to maintain your own sentience, because that spell, like, you're not designed to have your own identity for this long. The spell's in direct defiance of that. It is continuously eroded by the passage of time, but cannot truly fade. So you have to break apart other people's souls and use that to patch together this identity. And as time goes on, you lose more and more touch with your old life. You can no longer derive pleasures from the small things of life. You get more and more focused and obsessed with whatever your interests were in life.
Yeah. We could probably talk to it a bit more, but we ran out of time talking about other wonderful things.
Mm-hmm. Were there any other key points before I let you go about liches that you wanted to cover? Do you think we got the gist?
I would say that more than any other undead, liches are going to be inherently evil, almost irrevocably so, because in order to get the secrets from the beings that have them, you have to do monstrously horrible things.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just going to have you do one little quest. This is the quest to become a lich is going to be going through and like eradicating the entire family line of the enemy of a certain dark god, taking the remnants of those creatures and turning them into some kind of weird apple pie to then feed to anybody who ever loved them, and then taking those people who have done that and ripping the very foundations of their own souls to create some kind of magic box to keep your soul in. It's and that's just one piece of it. You're basically turning yourself into the simp of a really dark, awful god and doing whatever it is that they're asking you to do to get this secret. You're basically just making them happy enough to where they'll go, okay, fine, you can have it. But at that point, whatever your goal was when you started out being a lich has been so perverted and ruined by having to go through this process that I would say, in regards to how we talked about how mortals usually, I don't think, can be inherently evil. They can just do bad things. By the time you are a mortal that completes the process of becoming a lich, you have become an evil creature.
Yes.
It is an awful, terrible thing. And even a lich that then regrets its decision and goes back and says, you know what, maybe I don't want to keep eating people's souls and I'll just let myself fall into demi-lichdom or whatnot. They still had to do awful things to get there. And regardless, they are a terrible entity and a vile stain upon the world.
It's one closing comment about magic in Anacra. There's a lot of dark magic in Anacra, but dark magic is not evil. Dark magic is dangerous. Evil is magic that causes or requires harm to function. That's evil magic. If you have to deliberately inflict suffering, or if the magic can only be used to create suffering and make people's lives worse, that's evil magic, and becoming a lich involves evil magic.
The most evil of magic.
Cool. Well, this has been Lunch and Lore. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Join us next week, again, same time, same day, Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific. This has been Tormented by Gnomes and NinjaManMat. Have a fantastic day.
Later.